When I finally packed the last bag, I thought I was walking toward freedom. I didn't realize I was walking straight into another kind of prison. My name is Liana, and I'm 38 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed endurance was the same thing as love. I believed that if I just held on, things would get better, that all marriages had storms, and mine was just a particularly long one. But that morning, when I closed the door of the small townhouse I was renting with trembling hands, I knew something inside me had already broken for good. The air was sharp with the scent of rain. My two children, Evan, who was 11, and Sophie, 9, stood near the car, quiet, confused, hugging their backpacks. I remember Sophie clutching her teddy bear, the same one her father used to call that ragged old thing. I didn't have the strength to correct her posture or tell her not to drag it on the ground. Because when you leave a man like Alex, you don't think about neatness or manners. You think about breathing. Just breathing. Back when I first met Alex, I was 24, freshly graduated, working as a paralegal at a small firm. He was a confident young contractor who walked into the office one afternoon to handle a case about a housing permit. He smiled in a way that made you feel seen, and for a girl who had grown up feeling invisible, that was intoxicating. He was charming then, the kind of man who'd open doors, remember how I liked my coffee, who'd say things like, "You deserve to be taken care of." I mistook control for care. When we married, I thought I was stepping into stability. Alex had ambition. He wanted a business of his own. I supported him, late nights balancing receipts, packing lunches, putting off my own law school dreams because someone needed to stay home for the kids. At first, it was little things. He wanted to handle the finances, said he was better with numbers. He'd check my phone, just making sure no one's bothering you. I told myself it was love, protective love. But over time, love started to sound like criticism. "Why do you talk so much? Why can't you be more like Sarah? She knows how to support her husband. You're lucky I don't leave." He never hit me, not then. But words can bruise in quieter ways. They stay under the skin, invisible to everyone else. I remember one morning vividly, the smell of eggs burning, the clock blinking 7:42 a.m., the rush of getting Evan ready for school. Alex stormed in because I'd used the wrong coffee mug. That's how fragile our peace had become, one ceramic cup away from war. And yet, I still defended him to my mother, to my friends. "He's under stress," I'd say. "He's working so hard for us." But really, I was afraid. Afraid of who I'd be without him. Afraid of the silence that might follow if I stopped pretending. By the time I turned 36, Alex had built his company into something modestly successful. Outwardly, we looked perfect. The suburban home, 2 kids, Sunday church. People would say, "You're such a beautiful family." And I'd smile. Because what else could I do? The first real fracture came one afternoon when Evan came home from school quieter than usual. He sat at the kitchen table, his eyes on his cereal. I asked what was wrong. He hesitated, then said softly, "Dad told me not to tell you stuff about what happens when you're gone." I froze. "What kind of stuff?" He shrugged, spoon clinking against the bowl. "Just he says you don't need to know everything. That mom's worried too much." That night, I waited until Alex got home. The garage door opened, then the heavy stomp of his boots echoed through the hallway. He smelled like sweat and sawdust. I asked, "Why are you telling Evan to hide things from me?" He looked at me like I was a child who'd misbehaved. "Because you make everything dramatic, Liana. The boy needs space." "Space from me? From your constant anxiety. Let me parent my way." He walked past me, poured himself a drink, and turned on the TV. That was how he ended conversations, by drowning them in noise. But it wasn't just that. Over the next few months, Alex began using the kids in small, manipulative ways. If I said no to something, he'd say yes, then tell them, "See? I'm not the mean one." When I tried to discipline them, he'd undercut me. And then at night, he'd whisper things like, "They'll never pick you over me." I didn't know it then, but he was already preparing the battlefield. It escalated after Christmas. We were visiting his parents, who adored Alex and tolerated me. During dinner, his mother commented that Evan was getting tall. Alex smirked and said, "He's gonna be just like me. Thank God, right?" Everyone laughed. I smiled tightly. Later, as we were leaving, he muttered under his breath, "You embarrassed me. You always do." "For what?" I asked. "For existing the way you do." That night, he shoved a glass off the counter. It shattered, the sound slicing through the quiet. Sophie screamed. He didn't touch me, but his rage filled every corner of that room. And in that moment, I realized the kids were learning what love looked like from him. That terrified me more than anything. 2 weeks later, I started hiding money, small bills tucked inside a flower jar. A friend at church gave me the number of a shelter, just in case. And when Alex forgot his phone at home one afternoon, curiosity turned into survival instinct. I opened it. There were messages, not romantic ones, but worse in a way. Conversations with his attorney friend about custody laws, about leverage, about establishing her instability. My hands went cold. He wasn't just angry, he was planning. I wish I could tell you that I confronted him right then, that I was brave and loud and refused to be small. But that's not how it happened. Fear doesn't vanish, it calcifies. That night, he came home, kissed Sophie on the head, and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. I remember the smell of his cologne, heavy, cloying, and how it suddenly made me nauseous. I tucked the kids into bed, then stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at the dark street, thinking, he's going to destroy me if I don't leave first. So I did what scared women do. I planned quietly. For weeks, I gathered documents, birth certificates, school records. I created a new email under a different name, contacted a lawyer discreetly. And one Thursday morning, when Alex left for work, I packed our lives into 3 suitcases and drove away. I didn't cry. Not then. Because when you finally cross the threshold between survival and freedom, tears feel like a luxury you can't afford. That night, as the kids slept in the small townhouse's bedroom, I sat on the floor, phone in hand, reading messages from family and friends. Some were supportive, others less so. Alex had already started calling people. He told them I was unstable, that I had kidnapped the kids. And I realized he wasn't just going to let me go. He was going to make sure the world believed he was the victim. It didn't take long for Alex's shadow to find us. The first call came a week after we left. I was making dinner, pasta, because it was cheap and easy, and I was still getting used to budgeting on my own. Evan was doing homework on the kitchen counter, and Sophie was watching cartoons on the couch. The phone buzzed. Alex. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then, almost without thinking, I answered. "Hello?" He laughed softly. "So this is how it's going to be?" "I don't know what you mean. You take my kids and run off like a criminal, and you think there won't be consequences?" My chest tightened. There are kids, and I didn't run. I left because you're unstable, Liana. That's what everyone thinks now. His tone was almost amused, the way you'd talk to a child caught lying. He kept going calmly, methodically, listing all the people he'd already called. His parents, my boss from the law office, even our church group. "I told them you've been having episodes," he said. "Mood swings, anxiety. It'll make the custody hearing easier." The sound of the pot boiling over startled me. I hung up without another word, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. That night, I couldn't eat. My stomach felt hollow, like everything inside me was dissolving. 2 days later, I got a message from my sister, Megan. "Liana, I don't know what's going on, but Alex says you've been having a breakdown. He sounds really concerned. Are you okay?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I typed back, "Please don't believe him. I'm safe. The kids are safe." Then I turned off my phone. It was like watching the ground crumble beneath me. Every relationship I had, every friendship, every connection, he was poisoning them one by one. But the worst part wasn't his lies. It was how easily people believed them. Because Alex had always been charming, controlled, successful. I was the quiet one, the nervous one. I'd cried at parties when arguments got too loud. I'd once left a gathering early because he humiliated me in front of his coworkers. He'd built an image. I'd been his contrast. It was late January when the envelope arrived. Thin, official, and cruel in its simplicity. He was suing for full custody. The claim? Emotional instability, potential risk to children's well-being. I remember sitting on the floor, the kids asleep upstairs, the sound of rain against the window. I stared at those words until they blurred. For days after, I couldn't focus. I'd catch myself forgetting to eat, missing calls from my lawyer. Fear has a way of shrinking time. Every hour feels both endless and gone. I kept replaying all the moments that might be used against me. Every time I'd cried in front of him. Every anxious night. Every angry text I'd sent. He had documentation. I knew he did. He always kept records. Then came the social worker's visit. A polite woman named Marcy, soft-spoken but cautious. She looked around the small townhouse, asked about routines, about meals, about whether the kids had nightmares. When she left, Evan asked, "Are we in trouble?" "No," I said. "Someone just wants to make sure we're okay." "Is it Dad?" I didn't answer. A week later, I got a call from Alex again. This time, his voice was quieter, colder. "You could stop all this, Just come back. We can make it easy." "You think I'd go back after everything?" "Not for me, for them. The kids need a stable home. Judges like stability." It wasn't even a threat. It was strategy. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. After I hung up, I went into the kids' room. Sophie was asleep, hair spread across the pillow, her small hand clutching that same teddy bear. Evan was pretending to sleep, but when I tucked him in, he whispered, "Mom, is Dad mad at us?" That question, so soft, so unsure, broke something inside me. He was turning our children into collateral. The first time I saw his side of the story online, I was scrolling through Facebook, half distracted, trying to stay connected with a few old friends. There it was, a post from his account. "Pray for my kids. Their mother's struggling, and I'm doing my best to protect them." Hundreds of comments. "Stay strong, Alex. She'll come to her senses. You're such a good father." I wanted to scream at the screen, to defend myself, to tell the truth, but my lawyer warned me against it. "Anything you post can be used in court," she said. "Let him talk. We'll show evidence." But how do you fight lies when silence makes them louder? The breaking point came the night of the school recital. It was Evan's first piano performance. I'd promised myself it would be a calm night, no stress, no drama. But when I walked into the auditorium, Alex was there. Sitting in the front row, suit crisp, smile polished. People greeted him warmly. Some glanced at me with that pitying look that said they'd already chosen sides. He waved me over. "Liana," he said softly, "we need to talk." "Not here," I whispered. "Just wanted you to know, I'm asking for emergency custody tomorrow. The kids belong with someone stable." He smiled as if he'd just discussed the weather. Then he patted my shoulder and walked away. During Evan's performance, I tried to focus, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I remember every note, not because of its beauty, but because it was the sound of me breaking apart in silence. That night, when we got home, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried until my throat burned. I wasn't just fighting for freedom anymore. I was fighting for existence, for the right to be seen as a capable mother, not the broken woman he wanted everyone to believe I was. A few days later, my lawyer, a patient, steady woman named Dana, handed me a folder. "Start documenting," she said. "Every call, every message, every threat will show a pattern." So I did. Every time Alex called, I wrote it down. Every conversation with the kids about his manipulation, I recorded my recollections. I started therapy, not because I was unstable, but because I needed proof of stability. I joined a support group for women leaving abusive marriages. For the first time, I heard my own story coming out of other people's mouths. That's when I realized I wasn't crazy. I was conditioned. And slowly, something shifted. The fear started to turn into resolve. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. A month later, Alex slipped up. He sent an email meant for his lawyer to me. In it, he wrote, "If she refuses to settle, I'll push the mental health narrative harder. People already believe it. We just need to make sure the judge does too." My hands shook as I read it, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, that quiet, rising certainty that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. I printed it, handed it to Dana the next morning. She looked up at me and said, "This changes everything." For the first time in years, I felt like the room had air again. That's when I realized this wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth, and I was finally ready to fight for it. When you've been silenced long enough, the first time you finally speak up feels foreign, like your own voice doesn't quite belong to you yet. The morning after I gave my lawyer that email, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing my hair, staring at my reflection. My face looked older than I remembered, thinner, harder. But my eyes, they looked awake for the first time in years. That's when I made myself a promise. No more reacting to him. No more letting his version of me define my life. From now on, every move I made would be deliberate, documented, defensible. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments. Therapy twice a week, meetings with Dana, family counseling sessions for the kids. Every time Alex tried to contact me, I routed everything through email. No more phone calls, no more ambushes. I was done letting him twist my words. At first, he didn't notice. Then, one afternoon, he emailed me. "You think this is going to make you look better? Refusing to communicate? You're making yourself look uncooperative." I didn't respond. I forwarded it straight to Dana. She called later that evening, her tone calm but firm. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing. He's walking himself into a pattern of coercion. The more he tries to provoke you, the clearer it becomes who he really is." For the first time, silence was working in my favor. Still, the hardest part wasn't the legal fight. It was the kids. Evan started to pull away. He'd get quiet after calls with his dad, defensive when I asked questions. One night, after Sophie went to bed, he looked up from his homework and said, "Dad says you're keeping us from him. He says you're mad all the time." I swallowed hard. Do I seem mad all the time? He shrugged. Sometimes. It would have been easier to tell him Alex was lying, to expose his father's cruelty. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed my son to learn the truth on his own terms. So I said, "It's okay if you miss him, honey. You're allowed to love both of us." He looked at me for a long time, like he wasn't sure he believed me, and then he nodded. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat on the floor beside his bed and whispered, "One day, you'll see." A month before the custody hearing, Alex filed for an emergency injunction, claiming I'd emotionally manipulated the children. The evidence? Text messages, screenshots, taken out of context. He even claimed I'd made unfounded accusations about him, though I'd never spoken to anyone outside my lawyer and therapist. It was surreal watching my own words turned into weapons. Every message I'd written out of fear, "Please stop calling," "Please leave us alone," now painted as instability. But Dana was steady. "We'll dismantle it piece by piece," she said. "He's underestimating us." And we did. Every allegation he made, we met with proof, timestamps, corroboration, witness statements. My therapist testified about my consistency, my parenting. My friend from church, the one who gave me the shelter contact, testified about Alex's controlling nature. Piece by piece, the masks started to crack. The first day of the custody hearing, I saw Alex across the courtroom. Crisp suit, hair perfectly combed, expression solemn. the picture of the wounded husband. He even brought his parents, sitting behind him like loyal witnesses. When it was my turn to testify, I felt my knees tremble as I stood. My lawyer squeezed my hand. "Take your time," she whispered. I looked at the judge, a woman in her 50s with a face that had probably seen every kind of pain imaginable, and I began. I talked about the years of subtle control, the isolation, the verbal manipulation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. When Dana presented the accidentally sent email, the courtroom went still. The judge read it twice, then looked up and said, "Mr. Bennett, did you write this?" Alex shifted in his seat. "That's taken out of context. Please explain the context in which L pushed the mental health narrative harder means something else," she said dryly. He stammered, muttered something about strategy, and the judge's expression hardened. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked cornered. Later, in the hallway, as I waited for the next session, he approached me. "Nice performance in there," he muttered. "You think anyone really believes this?" I turned to face him. "I don't care what they believe anymore. I care what my kids see. And one day, they'll see everything." His eyes flickered, a crack of something almost like fear. Then he smirked, stepped back, and walked away. But that small moment, that tiny flicker, it carried me through the next few weeks. The interim ruling came first, shared custody pending final judgment. It wasn't the total win I'd dreamed of, but it was validation. The judge cited concerns regarding the father's conduct and manipulative communications. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something more complicated, not triumph, but release. For years, I'd lived waiting for his next move. Now, for the first time, he had to wait for mine. Then something unexpected happened. Alex started slipping. He missed a visitation appointment, claimed he was busy with work. Then another. He'd show up late, send curt texts. One afternoon, he dropped Sophie off early, clearly agitated. She ran inside crying. "Daddy said you'll make us hate him." I knelt down. "Sweetheart, no one can make you hate anyone. You get to decide how you feel." She sniffled. "He said you're lying." "Then he must be very scared," I said softly. "People say hurtful things when they're scared." That night, I wrote the incident down. Time, date, verbatim quotes, the whole thing. I didn't know it then, but that record would become the final nail in his case. At the next hearing, his lawyer tried to argue that I was alienating the children. But when Dana submitted his missed visit logs and the messages he'd sent afterward, guilt-tripping, manipulating, the room went silent again. The judge leaned back and said, "Mr. Bennett, this is not the conduct of a parent seeking stability for their children. This is control." He tried to protest, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need to destroy him. He was doing that himself. When court adjourned, I stepped outside into the sunlight. The air was cool, bright. I felt a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years, not victory, not vengeance, but something pure. Freedom. I hadn't won yet. The final ruling was still weeks away, but I'd reclaimed something far more important. My voice. That evening, as I cooked dinner, spaghetti again, because Evan said it was lucky food, Sophie came up behind me and hugged my waist. "Mom?" she said. "Yes, honey?" "Are we going to be okay now?" I smiled, brushed her hair away from her face. "Yes," I said, "we already are." The day of the final custody ruling felt strangely quiet. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that makes everything sound muted. The kids were at school, and I sat in the living room, staring at the empty coffee cup in my hands. I'd spent months preparing for this day, but now that it was here, I didn't feel ready. Dana arrived 15 minutes early, crisp and composed as always. "No matter what happens," she said, setting down her briefcase, "you've already done the hardest part. You told the truth." I nodded, but my heart was pounding. When we walked into the courthouse, Alex was already there. He didn't look like himself. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. There was no smirk this time, no attempt at control, just exhaustion. His parents weren't there either. Maybe they'd stopped believing him too. The hearing was brief. The judge summarized months of testimony, exhibits, and reports. I barely heard half of it, my ears were ringing. But then she said it. Given the evidence of coercive control, emotional manipulation, and consistent instability on the father's part, the court awards primary custody to Mrs. Bennett. Supervised visitation will remain in effect until further notice. It took a moment for the words to sink in. Primary custody. Supervised visitation. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just sat there, frozen, as the weight of years lifted off my chest. Alex stood motionless. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. Then, quietly, he got up and left the courtroom without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw him in person. The days that followed felt like stepping into a different life. When the news spread through our community, neighbors, church members, mutual friends, the story shifted. People started to reach out. Old friends who'd once distanced themselves texted or called, saying things like, "I didn't realize what was happening. I'm so sorry." Even Alex's own sister, Marissa, messaged me. "You used to say you were unstable, but after reading what came out in court, I think you were just trying to survive. I wish I'd believed you sooner." It was strange, this quiet redemption. I didn't want to bask in it. I just wanted peace. I stopped trying to explain or correct the past. Let people think what they wanted. The truth had already spoken for itself. At church one Sunday, months after the ruling, the pastor pulled me aside. "We've been praying for you," he said softly. "What you did took courage." I thanked him, though I wasn't sure courage was the right word. Courage implied I hadn't been terrified every single day. But I smiled anyway. Later that morning, as I stood by the coffee table, one of the women, the same one who once told me, "Marriage is about endurance," dear, walked up to me. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. "I thought you were giving up. But now I see you were just protecting your children." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was something close. Sometimes, that's all closure really is, not people admitting they were wrong, but people seeing the truth for the first time. In the months after the ruling, Alex's facade continued to unravel. He lost his job, apparently after missing too many days for court hearings and supervised visits. Word got around about the judge's comments, and soon, people who once admired him started keeping their distance. He tried to move out of town for a while, but his reputation followed him. The last I heard, he was living with a friend, seeing the kids only through a court-appointed monitor. When he emailed asking if we could try again for the kids' sake, I didn't respond. Not out of anger, just because there was nothing left to say. I'd spent years fighting to be heard. Now, silence was my answer. The house felt lighter without the constant tension. Evan started smiling again, that big, unguarded grin I hadn't seen since he was 8. Sophie took up painting. Our kitchen table was always covered with paper, brushes, and splotches of color. One evening, we were all sitting outside on the porch. The sun was setting, the air smelled faintly of rain. Evan turned to me and said, "Mom, I get it now. About Dad." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "He said stuff about you, bad stuff. But when I saw how he talked to me, I realized it wasn't true." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry you had to see that." He shrugged, his voice calm. "It's okay. I think I needed to." That night, when I tucked them both into bed, I stood by their door for a long time, just listening to their steady breathing. Peace has a sound, and in that moment, I heard it. It was the quiet restoration of my truth. For years, he had built his power on people's perception, on charm, on image. But when the truth finally surfaced, he didn't need to be punished. His own lies had done the work for me. I never wanted to destroy him. I just wanted my children to be safe, and for the truth to exist in daylight. Now, it did. I started volunteering at a local women's center that summer. The first time I walked in, I recognized the same smell that used to cling to my clothes when I stayed at the shelter: bleach, soap, old carpet. But this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like beginning again. I told my story only once, not to relive it, but to remind others that leaving isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the bravest kind of love. Love for yourself. Love for your children. Love for the life that still waits for you on the other side of fear. One afternoon, after a support meeting, I found a note on my windshield. It read, "Thank you for sharing your story today. You gave me the courage to leave." I sat there for a long time, holding that note in my hand, realizing that my pain had somehow become someone else's hope. That was the moment I truly felt whole again. It's been 3 years since the court ruling, and sometimes I still wake up expecting to hear the sharp slam of the front door, the sound that used to send a shiver down my spine. But it's always quiet now. Peace doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments. In the smell of pancakes on a Saturday morning. In the laughter echoing down the hallway. In realizing I can leave my phone face up on the counter and not feel afraid. The house feels different, lighter. The walls don't listen in on our whispers anymore. They hold warmth again. Evan is 13 now, taller than me by an inch, though he still pretends he isn't. Sophie just turned 11. She drew a painting last week of 3 silhouettes standing on a hill at sunset. When I asked her who it was, she smiled. "Us, the Bennetts." That made me laugh. I hadn't heard my last name spoken that proudly in years. For a long time after leaving Alex, I felt like I didn't exist outside of what he'd made me. Every decision I made, every opinion I shared, was filtered through his judgment. It took me months to understand what freedom really was. At first, it felt strange, like wearing a new pair of shoes that didn't quite fit. I caught myself apologizing constantly, even for things like leaving a light on or spending a little extra at the grocery store. Then one day, while doing the dishes, I realized I hadn't apologized once that entire week. That's how healing happens, quietly, in the smallest, most ordinary victories. I began writing again. Nothing big, just small essays, reflections. One of them, titled "Leaving Isn't Losing," got shared by a local advocacy page. Dozens of women commented, telling their own stories. That's when I realized something. Revenge hadn't healed me. Truth had. The first time Alex saw the kids again after the court order, he didn't say much. It was a supervised visit at a neutral center, just 2 hours. Evan told me afterward, he looked tired. I nodded, unsure what to say. A few months later, I received an email from Alex, short, hesitant. "I know I've done things I can't undo. I don't expect forgiveness. But thank you for taking care of them. You always were the better parent." For a while, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend I hadn't read it. But another part, the one that had fought for peace, not payback, understood that maybe this was his version of accountability. I didn't reply. But I stopped wishing him harm after that day. Last spring, the kids and I took our first trip together, just us. We went to the coast, rented a small cabin near the water. The mornings smelled like salt and coffee. We spent hours collecting seashells, letting the waves pull at our feet. On the last night, we sat around a fire pit. Evan roasted marshmallows while Sophie hummed softly, her curls glinting in the firelight. I looked at them and thought, this is what survival looks like. Not just breathing, but living. Sophie leaned against me. "Do you ever miss Dad?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. "Sometimes," I said. "I miss the person I thought he was. But I don't miss how it felt." She nodded, staring into the flames. "I think I understand. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means reclaiming. I used to think leaving was a kind of defeat, proof that I'd failed to make love work. But I was wrong. Leaving was the beginning of dignity. I learned that sometimes the bravest form of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so peaceful it renders the past powerless. And I learned that love, real love, doesn't demand silence. It doesn't threaten or belittle or use children as pawns. Love protects. Love listens. Love heals. Last week, I was invited to speak at a small community event about resilience. When I walked on stage, I saw women of all ages in the crowd, some holding notebooks, some holding hands. I told them my story not as a victim, but as a survivor. And when I finished, a young woman in the front row stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered, "Thank you, I thought I was alone." In that moment, I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been silenced, anyone who'd ever mistaken endurance for love. We were all finding our voices together. That night, after the event, I came home, tucked the kids in, and sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the moonlight touched the garden, the same one I'd once planted with Alex, when life still felt full of promises. Now it was overgrown, wild, but somehow more beautiful that way. Like me. I took a deep breath and whispered to the night, "I'm still here." And for the first time, those words didn't sound like survival. They sounded like freedom. So that's how I left my abusive marriage, not through revenge, not through anger, but through truth and quiet strength. He used our children to hurt me, but in the end, they became my reason to heal. Sometimes, peace isn't the loud victory you expect. It's the quiet morning when you realize you no longer flinch at the sound of your own name. Would you have fought the way I did, or walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if my story reached you today, don't forget to subscribe, because healing deserves to be heard.